This is Software Meets Business, a podcast sponsored by Head Channel.
So welcome to another episode of Software Meets Business. And with me today, I'm very excited to have Ron Shteinberg, who is the co-founder and chief technology officer at Bounce. Welcome, Ron.
Hi, great to be here.
Good to have you with us. So, as you know, this podcast is all about how software integrates with business and business integrates with software. So I know that you've got quite a background in getting software products built. Maybe you want to sort of just talk us through the early days and your first experiences.
So I've been in technology for 2 decades now. I know I look younger than that, but I've been doing this for 20 years now. Started off as a software developer, then started managing small teams, bigger teams, whole engineering infrastructure. Over the years, about 11 years ago, I moved to London with my family and got more into fintech and kind of pure software companies. I've been living in London for 8 years, then came back to Israel to start Bounce. So over the years, I've built countless types of software systems, from embedded software that runs on chips to fintech systems, decision-making systems. So I've done them all.
Great. So obviously you were kind of building the software yourself, and then you started having a team, and then at some point you started needing to find other people to come and help build the software that you were working on. So just talk us through kind of some of the early challenges you had, finding the right people.
So actually, I usually do it the other way around. So when I start a project, either it's starting a new company or starting a new project within a company, many times there is a sense of urgency to start things quickly and not wait until you find the right people to build a proper team. So my kind of tactics there is usually I would go to a trusted outsource company to bring along a few developers just to get the project rolling and starting to work in it and building the infrastructure for later development. And then while things are being built out and we know that we are starting to deliver results, it gives me more time to really hire the right type of engineering team that I would like in order to take this project forward. It also gives me a better sense of the type of skills the team would need to have, the type of roles that we would need to have there, while still kind of making it very cost effective and kind of progressing very, very fast.
Okay. So basically, when you come up to build out a new product, the first thing you normally do is hire in a outsourced team to then help you understand the actual team that you need.
When I say this, it's mostly around either I'm starting a new, let's say, joint venture, when I'm starting kind of really from the bottom up. When it's within an already established company, obviously the tax is going to be a bit different because you already have the headcount in your company that you can maybe pick and choose in order to the project. And then you can supplement them with some outsourced developers just kind of to keep everything in place and not reduce the speed of progress in other area of the company. But in every toss and turn, having kind of a trusted outsourced partner is always useful and can really bring you the results you want in a fairly quick time.
Okay, because I think some people, try and approach it from, no, I need to have everyone in-house, but you seem to have the approach where you like to have a kind of a split between in-house and external. Is there a reason for that?
I think that generally speaking, as an engineering organization, you have to be flexible enough. Demands are coming and going, the markets are fluctuating, and you need to have that flexibility to grow and reduce your team fairly fast and without having a kind of an overhead of needing to let people go. So having a combination of internal team and outsourced team is always kind of a desirable state, at least in my view. In terms of how I would split the work between those workforces is a bit different. I would always strive to have my internal team own the core, or at least to be heavily involved in building the core technology that we need, while having the outsourced team do things that are more on the outskirts of what we're doing. So it would be building new integrations or integrating with new tools where the expertise that is required there is relatively low, and it's not really a knowledge that I have to have in-house for any future development. Basically, it would be core internal team, everything else external team. Yeah, that would be my strategy there.
Okay. And when you say that, do you mean, so the core product, you'd like the internal team to know and understand, which kind of makes sense. And then there might be some discrete parts around the outside of that, like a reporting module, for instance, that you might, put out to the...
I can give a great example of what we're building here at Bounce. So a lot of, like a huge part of what we're doing is kind of, without going into the details, we analyze transaction and make decision about, let's say, something about those transactions. So building the flow of taking the transaction and running it through the machine learning models and having that system to be super fast and super accurate and all that infrastructure is built internally. I wouldn't want, this is a knowledge that I have to keep in-house because this is the core of our business. Another part of what we're doing is integrating with new payment systems. So we have an integration with Stripe and Braintree, et cetera, et cetera. Building those integration is something that is not in the core of my business. So I'm happy to have anyone building that part for us if it brings us to market faster that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And what about sometimes when you're building out products, you need to build out tooling to help you build the product? Would tooling also be something that you put out to the external team?
It's an interesting question. So I think in most of the projects that I did, I don't know, maybe it's something wrong with me, but I'm always kind of thinking infrastructure first. So I start a project by thinking about how's the deployment going to happen? How's the infrastructure is going to look like? Because I know that if you leave those things last, like before we go live, now let's build our production environment, you usually find all the things that you haven't thought of and all the things that are going to break there. So I'm kind of starting with the basics, like I have my hello world deployed to production first, and I know how that pipeline looks like. I know how things are being approved. And then on that, we can build anything else. Having said that, every once in a while, you have like maybe these infrastructure or CI/CD projects that you want to do, and you don't want to spend your very expensive internal resources on that. So in those cases, yeah, I might take, again, some external resources, outsource developers to help build that. But because, again, these systems of deployment and CI/CD and infrastructure are super important for us at any point in time, because if something breaks, I can't just call up a dude in Ukraine and tell him, hey, you've built it, now come and fix it. It always has to be with collaboration from my team. So they need to be aware of everything that is being built. So first, there is a design document that the external resource would provide us with. It will have to get the approval of my team that this is the way that they would want to manage it in the future, come to kind of an agreement on how that's going to look, and only then will they start it. And again, everything that they're doing is going to be reviewed by my team and then deployed by my team, etc.
Yeah, I mean, deployment pipelines are super important, and starting, with Hello World going into production at the start of, your work is just a great tip, because a lot of people do miss that, and a lot of people get to the end and then go, oh, you need to deploy this. I'm kind of keen to understand, because you talked about a lot about, trusted partners. So obviously over time used a lot of different people and managed to find some outsourced teams that you trust. Talk about that journey. I mean, did you make some mistakes at the start, or was it all plain sailing?
Let me just interrupt this podcast for a few seconds. I just wanted to let you know about our wonderful sponsor, HeadChannel. HeadChannel builds software engineering teams, and they've been building software for clients since 2003. They have a very simple engagement model. Either they develop and run it, or they build it and you run it. They can also help with finding a fractional CTO if you need that support. You can find them at headchannel.co.uk. And now back to the podcast.
So nothing is ever smooth sailing with software development. So looking back at my early career, I would say when I was a software developer running a relatively small team and doing real-time code for processors, there was less kind of outsource involved. When I started going into kind of cloud-based or cloud-native applications and kind of pure software companies, this is where the need started to come up. And at that point, I didn't have any experience with working with external, with outsourced companies. I didn't know how to choose them, where to find them, etc. So what we did was kind of early on, one of my earlier projects, is I hired a couple and kind of developer here, developer there, just to see how that works and which one of them provides more like better service, better code, better developers. And as I started doing more and more of the projects, I started preparing myself some sort of a checklist or kind of a more of a matrix for when I start now a new project. Then I have this matrix that helps me choose the right software company that I need. So obviously the columns in that matrix would be the companies that I'm looking at. And in terms of rows, you would have like, what is the technology stack that they use? Are they just doing backend Python? Are they doing other backends? Do they do front end and backend? Other things would be the size of the company, because on one hand, you don't want to be partnering with like one of these huge, or at least I don't want to partner with these like huge outsourced companies, because then you're just a small customer in a huge machine and like nobody really cares about you. Nobody gives you the attention that you need when you need it. On the other hand, you don't want to partner up with the really small houses, because then if you need to expand your team, the time it would take them to bring on new developers is similar to the time it would take you to bring someone in-house anyway. So you need to find that sweet spot of having, I don't know, maybe a couple of hundreds of developers, a few hundreds of developers, so that you kind of reach that point of flexibility. And then it would be what sort of engagements do they support? In some cases, you would want to have a team working in silo because kind of it's a separated project from everything else. So there are companies that do only that. There are some companies that would do embedded teams. So they'll give you developers who are embedded in your team, and then you work as one big happy team. So there's like, what is the right engagement that I need for this project, and what sort of engagement does these companies provide? And maybe some other factors depending on the project itself. And then basically you score them by these parameters, and then whoever wins. Like you can beat data as much as you would want.
Okay, that's some good tips. Do you look for a company that has a certain percentage of people on the bench? Do you ask them about the bench? How many people are kind of available on the bench, or do you just go for companies that are around a couple of 100 to 200 sort of size? Is that
my assumption that if they are at that size, they would always have enough people to kind of act quickly on things. What I do tend to ask them is kind of, what are your developers doing when they're not on the job? Like if they're not particularly hired right now, what are they doing? And companies that tell me that, if they're not employed, they're just sitting at home waiting, then that's kind of a red flag, because that at the end of that process, there is some very unhappy person, right? If they're telling me, there's always the internal projects that we're building, there are internal tools that we're building, libraries that we're building to help our customers in the future, templates, whatever, then it kind of pacifies me a little bit, because I'm thinking, okay, they're always busy, they're always looking at new things, they're always engaged, so that's always a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you try and ask about how long people have been there? I'm assuming, what the average sort of tenure, the average length of time that someone's employed at the company?
Not in particular. I think that one of the drawbacks of working with an outsourced company is that you have less control over who is going to be the developer that you're going to get this time around. So I'm not in particular asking them how long have they been in that specific companies, but in terms of how, what sort of experience they have, how many years of development experience they have, for sure. Not in that particular company.
Yeah, because I know one thing that, I've spoken to other people, obviously, on the podcast, and they've talked about churn is quite a disruptive thing. So, you get a team and then suddenly they start churning with the outsourced developer, and that doesn't really help. So I just wondered if you had any things you look for to understand whether there's going to be churn.
You're raising a great point, and maybe I should start asking about that as well, but it hasn't come up yet. And I think there's only maybe one time I can remember that a developer left mid-project because they left the company. I had cases where they said, listen, like these guys with a specific expertise that we desperately need on another project, is it okay if we take him away for a while? But that happened maybe a couple of times, but someone leaving the company, my projects are usually super interesting. So whoever is engaging them wouldn't think about leaving anywhere else.
I think that's a very important point, because if the project's interesting to the team, I generally tend to see that you get a better reaction. People stay around and they get excited about what they're doing. Whereas if the project is a bit dull, it's harder. So
yeah, for sure. That's for sure. It's true for both external and internal teams.
And so do you kind of put, I mean, obviously you talked about the kind of in the earlier days you'd hire one or two people and kind of understand it that way. But say if you were going out to the market today and you were going to look for a team of, you needed 20 people maybe, what would you go through some kind of testing first of all, or how would you do that? Or would you just rely, I mean, obviously you've got your partners that you've worked with for a long time that you probably trust, but if you had to go with a new partner, would you do some kind of test?
I think, to be honest, in most cases, you don't have time to do testing. Like you either start doing the work or you don't do the work. I think in those cases, if I would need to hire something in completely new field, I would rely massively on recommendations. So, for example, I have a group on WhatsApp of CTOs, and I would ask, okay, who knows a software development house with expertise in ABC? I get their recommendation and then start building the same matrix, but just from those specific recommendations, knowing that they were recommended by peers, like-minded CTOs of startups, as opposed to maybe CTOs or development managers in much larger organization. So I know they care about similar things that I care about. So their recommendation will score highly in my list. But that would be my approach. And you take the people on. If all of them are crap, then you just replace them quickly with some other company. If it's just one or two, then you just ask them to replace that individual. From my experience, usually it works well. With the better companies, I even had cases where if I had one kind of lesser developer on the team, they even refunded me for some of his work because said, okay, the work he did wasn't in par with our expectations of our own developers. So here's a refund. Here's a new developer. Let's continue from there.
Another factor that comes into it, a lot of people that I talk to are not CTOs. They don't have a technical background. They're trying to build a product. Have you got any kind of advice or tips for people who don't have a technical background trying to do what you're doing to try and find an outsourced technical partner that they can trust?
So I've actually been involved in or spoke to a lot of people who had similar problems. I wouldn't recommend an entrepreneur that starting to build something to get a software development house to build them from scratch without having another technical person monitoring or helping them make the decisions. And I know that today, I mean, when I started doing kind of pure software, which was 11 years ago, we hadn't had much of those. But today, having a kind of fractional CTO, as it's called, there are huge sums of them out there. You can always find someone you trust, someone who worked in a company, somebody who can get recommended that would come in part-time just to help you kind of manage the technical team, making sure that they're on path to do things in the right way, thinking about architecture in advance. I wouldn't kind of take in a software development house word kind of in face value because it's always there always might be some conflict of interest, and their interest probably be kind of let's have the more developers as we can, let's make more money. And I don't blame you for that, but it's just how it is. So having someone kind of that is not connected to them and is kind of on your side always help in my view.
Yeah.
I've just seen so many projects implode because kind of inexperienced CEOs took software development house and they told him, yeah, we can do everything. We can do product, we can do technology, we can do everything, just to discover that they can do neither nor.
I've definitely been a proliferation of fractional CTOs in the market over the last few years, but there's an obvious area there that sometimes the fractional CTO actually be a front for a dev house or a dev shop, and probably the independent ones are the better ones to go for because they'll give you a better independent advice, right?
Yeah. So I know from our early experiences that a lot of the software development house said, yeah, we can kind of be your CTO as a service, and we have. But again, I think that having that impartial advice, someone who is not owed to the software development house and is purely get paid by you, so they have only your interest in mind, is a much better solution than kind of having everything sourced from the same place.
Yeah. Okay. So another really interesting area is how you pay for the service. And I know obviously you've got a long software background, and I think we're both on the same page with this. But we've got to throw that question out there. So, how do you feel about fixed price? Because a lot of people that we talk to who don't have a technical background instantly think that they come up with the requirements, they give it to the team deliver it for a fixed fee, and it's all good. A bit like buying a car.
Did it ever work for anyone? I wonder. Did the fixed price really stayed fixed until the end? Were there no kind of arguments on whether my requirement said A, but you understood it? Like, I honestly, I don't think it ever worked or could ever work without having some sort of friction there. Hence, having that kind of fractional CTO really, really helps because they can say, okay, when we saw the requirements, we thought it's going to be simple, but then it got complicated. And now you have this kind of impartial referee that says, yes, they're right. They got to a point where they discovered that this is not possible to do it in one way. They had to shift. And now you have someone on your side kind of making the call and say, yeah, it should cost more money than originally estimated. I don't think I ever did a fixed priced project because I've been in software for so long and I know how unpredictable these projects are. So I'm much rather paying the monthly fee, kind of tell me how much do I need to pay per developer. I'll make the decision based on that, and I'll just keep them real along the way and kind of call it out when I'm seeing that they're kind of messing around and not doing what they were supposed to do. But kind of having this black box where you just throw requirements at someone, even if you have the weekly checkups, and like honestly, I don't think I ever saw it work properly.
Yeah, I think people do get a bit confused, and they take that metaphor. I said car earlier, but I probably should have said like construction. People think they're building a building, but of course software is a bit different because you do,
But even building a building, like when was the last time anybody renovated their house and actually paid what they agreed in the first place?
Oh yeah, never.
It just never happens in complex projects. Exactly. With complex projects, it could never really work. And if your goal is to start battling with them and I don't take into the court or start arguing about what the contract said or didn't say, then be my guest. If your goal is to develop and ship software and products that work, you need to be on the developers, seeing what they do, and not start messing around with I said this, you said that. Where was the miscommunication?
Yeah, it's wasteful, isn't it? Which kind of leads me on to the other side. So if someone's going to take the leap, they're a non-technical, CEO, they're going to build a product and they've listened to your advice and they totally believe now that, fixed price doesn't work, so I need to pay for the team. How do they measure productivity? Do they need to worry about that? What should they, how do you know you're getting value for money out of the team?
Let's start with the beginning. Is measuring productivity is simple at all? Like if you have your internal team, is it easy to measure their productivity? How do you measure the productivity of your own developers, of your own analysts, your own salespeople? It's super difficult to measure in the first place. I think that working with software developers or working with these companies requires a lot of trust. And knowing these companies, or at least the good ones, the ones that you do want to partner with, they would care about productivity even more than you would care about. The really brilliant companies out there they will initiate the check-ins with you every couple of weeks. Are you happy with the results? Are you happy with what we're doing? Any comments? Is it too fast, too slow, too break? What's the state of the things? So these are the partners that you really want on your side. And I think generally it's tough because knowing CEOs, and I've worked with a bunch of them over the years, is that they're seldom happy. They always think that things are moving too slow and the productivity is down. So apart from communicating all the time and openly, there isn't a good way to tackle that issue. I wouldn't start bugging down on how do I measure the productivity of this team. I just start, if you're happy with them, the communication is open and they're very open about why things are taking longer than what they expected. I mean, there's kind of weekly or bi-weekly check-ins. If you're working on sprints and you see that they didn't deliver what they agreed on the sprint, and there's an open discussion on why haven't we finished everything this sprint, and you reckon their answers are good enough, satisfying enough, again, having that fractional CTO always helps because you have someone who understands their lingo and can call their bullshit if needed be. I wouldn't kind of be bogged down on that. Open communications and kind of following up and having those check-ins is the way to go, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. So
having said that, I wouldn't recommend anyone start a company that is based on technology without having a partner who is a technical person. In my opinion, it's a recipe for disaster.
yes, it is. So taking all of that knowledge, we've just been through some really great areas there, Ron. Really appreciate that. But taking all of that into what you're currently doing. So do you want to talk a little bit about Bounce and your experiences and how you brought them into what you're doing now?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'll always take my own advice when I can. So basically at Bounce, what we do is we help e-commerce merchants or anyone who has online payments to deal with declined payments. So we build a system where if an online merchant, they have users going all the way through their website. If it's an e-commerce website, they kind of put things in their basket, go all the way to checkout. And at that point, when a person tries to pay, the payment might get rejected by the issuer for whatever reason. So we've built a system that can in real time assess that transaction and kind of make a decision. What are the chances of this transaction to be retried and successfully retried in later or in other means? And then by that, we're kind of helping online merchants to convert more customers to paying customers, make more revenue, better spend their marketing expenses. So this is what we do here. So when we started the company, I think it's almost 3 years ago. Again, we got kind of initial fund from an angel investor, and it was super, super important for us to just start working because we've been playing with this idea for a while. And like the priority was like, we need to start to get the ball rolling. We need to have something live as soon as we can. So following my own advice, I went to one of my trusted partners, asked for a few developers, and they started building the software for us. We kind of did a lot of brainstorming around architecture and how things would work. And while they're working on that, then I started hiring my own internal team, started with someone quite senior so that they could manage the team for me or along with me, and then continued building the team around that. And as I hired more and more internal developers, I started reducing the headcount from the outsourced company. But we kept on a good relationship. And because they were already involved in that project, it was very easy later to kind of tell them, okay, now I need a couple of data operations people to kind of build our data pipeline. So they came in and they've built that. We had some issues around, not issues, but challenges around infrastructure and CI/CD. So we've bought kind of a couple of DevOps from them to build that. And overall, kind of every time kind of got a few people from their side to help us build things and then reduce that when we kind of own those things back. So yeah, this is our journey so far.
Good. No, it's fascinating to hear. So from my own mind, so Bounce, basically, when you get to the checkout, your card doesn't go through and it says, so sometimes that happens because, I don't know, they want to send you a text message, but you don't get the text message because, I don't know, something else happened or whatever. So does Bounce try and fix it at that point, or does it fix it afterwards?
No. So yeah, it happens a lot more than people are aware. Kind of general statistics say that around between 7 and 10% of card transactions are being declined every day globally. And it could be from like good reasons, insufficient funds, you don't have money in your account, your credit card is maxed out. But it could be just issuers worried about fraud. An example kind of personal example I like to give is I once needed to issue passports for my kids, right? I've got for my entire family actually, and I've got 4 kids, so it's a lot of passports to issue. So I went into the UK Gov website, filled in the form, paid, did that 4 times. 5th time, got rejected. And I had money in my account. It's a UK government website using a UK credit card. Why on earth would the 5th one be rejected? I assumed that on the issuer side, there was something kind of a rule that says, okay, there were 4 transactions at the same amount in the span of 5 minutes, then the 5th one we're going to reject because it doesn't feel right. And there is a lot of these cases out there. So what we do in real time is only make an assessment on, is this transaction was justly declined or is it a false decline? And when we say false decline, it can fall in several categories. Even the insufficient fund case, the fact that you didn't have the money in your account that time doesn't mean that you won't have it in a couple of days' time. It's going to be your payday, and on payday, you could pay for that. So it doesn't mean that you're not a good customer and you should be rejected. And then again, on kind of the fraud suspicion side, not everything that is suspected as fraud is actually fraud, as both you and I experienced and many other people experienced over the years. And we can in real time kind of do, or our models can do some sort of a reverse engineering to why the issuer decided why they decided, and then figure out whether we could reverse that decision. And if we feel that we can reverse that decision, then we basically tell the merchant to continue with the customer as if the transaction was a successful one. So if it's a product that needs shipping, they were already shipping it. If it's access to some digital service, they would give that access. And then offline, we are retrying that transaction. If we're successful, then the merchant gets their money in the usual ways. And for those cases where our models got it wrong, then we reimburse the merchants. So basically, with kind of zero risk, merchants can increase their revenue, increase their conversion rates, and have more happy customers.
Yeah, sounds really, really good. And I know quite a few. I know quite a few e-commerce platforms would, love to have that.
Send them over. We'll be happy to serve them.
Yeah. So obviously, you're getting off the ground now.
We've been live with this for 2 years now.
There we go.
We already saved millions of dollars to our customers. So it's not an hypothesis. It's actually a live, living product that actually shows great results.
That's great. That's great. Ron, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for imparting your wisdom about how software can meet business.
If only my kids were this happy to hear my wisdom. But yeah.
They will be one day. Don't worry. It'll happen. So Ron, thank you so much. You've been a great guest. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Software Meets Business, the podcast sponsored by Head Channel. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your preferred platform.